Okay, and welcome to the video analysis for the SEA AS Study of Poetry 1900s to Present, Robert Frost and Seamus Heaney Anthology. And this is an analysis, a very brief one, of Robert Frost's Acquainted with the Night. Themes, grief and loss, or journeys as well as a possibility. So Acquainted with the Night, here's just a copy of the poem that I'm sure your teacher has probably already went through with you. So we'll skip that and we'll get on to the nitty-gritty of the analysis. Contextual information. The poem is based on Robert Frost's own experiences with depression. It was first published in the Virginia Quarterly Review in 1927, and then in Frost's book, The Running Brook, in 1928. Acquainted with the Night is written in terza rima, and this form originated in Italy with Dante's Divine Comedy, very famous for the seven circles of hell and whatnot. It's much easier to find rhymes in Italian, so this cyclical rhyming form is incredibly difficult in English, but Frost conquers it or masters it. The three-line stanzas intertwined with rhyme trick you into thinking that you're moving forward in sound whilst really you're stuck. As we read, we'll find out how this form fits the content of Acquainted with the Night. Title. So the term acquainted suggests knowledge but no affection, and it suggests that the night time is actually a time of loneliness for him. Night seems to be the only time he can emerge from his solitude, and it seems that he's cut off from those who are associated with the daytime. It could be an extended metaphor for his depression, because we know that Frost actually suffered vastly with depression. Summary of the poem. So the speaker of the poem has walked around at night a lot. He's walked both away and back to somewhere, probably home in the rain. He's walked in the city and beyond the lights, perhaps out of the city, and he's looked down lonely, dark streets. He has walked by a watchman but didn't look at him because he didn't want to explain why he was there, not even with a glance. He stopped to listen to a voice calling out from another street, falsely hoping that it was calling for him, so there's just kind of immense loneliness or sadness. The speaker looks up at the Luminary clock, which is probably referring to the moon, but was dissatisfied with the time it showed. He ends by referring back to the first line of the poem, emphasising that he has in fact been acquainted with the night. Form and structure. So the rhythm, it's in iambic pentameter. It's regular, measured, best mimics the rhyme or the rhythm of the speaker working on his journey through the city. It takes the form of a sonnet, 14 lines, usually about love, but in this case we can see that it's not really about love. In fact, it's about maybe self-reflection, isolation, and a metaphorical as well as a physical journey. There are 5 stanzas divided into 4 tercet rhyming couplets. Terza rima is A, B, A, C, D, C, D, A, D, and then A, A. Okay? Third rhyme is used by the Italian poet Dante in his Divine Comedy after describing his descent into hell, and Frost uses this link to his depression, comparing his depression as a journey to hell. The rhyme scheme is circular, similar to the repeating issues of the speaker, and the idea that maybe sometimes depression is inescapable. You can sense through the repetition the weariness of the speaker on a dark, dreary night, so quite a bleak, dismal tone painted. Narrative point of view, it is first-person narration. It's in the past tense. The narrator seems depressed and isolated but chooses to be alone, deliberately avoiding the only other human, exploring his loneliness, sadness and longing. Tone. So it's described as gloomy, melancholic, bleak, pensive, hopeful, deflated, or self-pitying. Obviously, these are just brief references to tone. What you need to do is actually read through the poem, find a quote that fits with the tones listed here, so you're actually able to support your argument, and aim to always find another technique that generates that tone. So the metaphor creates a melancholic tone. The use of alliteration in blah 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 creates a pensive outlook on life and whatnot. Just adds an extra layer of sophistication to your analysis. So language devices, including imagery, we can see the I have is repeated at the start, so that's anaphora, repetition at the start of consecutive lines. He repeats the personal pronoun 7 times throughout the poem, emphasising the complete isolation that the speaker feels. It's also used to chart the gloom of the journey, trudging through the streets and creating the impression of monotony. Also a feeling of helplessness that nothing can or will change for him, which again paints a really bleak picture for us. The fact that he uses the choice of diction 1 shows that there are others like him. He is one person like this, but yet the singular term also kind of paradoxically almost serves to reinforce his loneliness as well. Out in rain suggests that this is a metaphor for journeying to the depths of his mind or emotions, and he comes back in a depressed state. So there's kind of like pathetic fallacy of the weather there, I suppose. And he comes back in rain as well, which is significant. There's caesural pause, highlighting that his journey has been meaningless. Nothing of substance or significance has happened. He has just walked out of wherever he is and walked back. Nothing fulfilling has happened to him in his urban journey. The caesura also creates a slow pace, emphasising his world-weary tone. The finished sentences at the end of each line is forcing the reader to stop, and it gives us this kind of disjointed idea of how depressed he is. There's no flow. There is enjambment, no flow or enjambment, indicating that the speaker isn't making any progress with his issues, which is strange because usually actually Frost and Heaney both love using enjambment because it gets the flow, it makes it conversational. But in this case, this is where Frost kind of goes away from that traditional use of enjambment. So he's back in rain. The use of juxtaposition of out and back is probably serving to further emphasise the pathetic fallacy that reinforces his misery, and the repetition of in rain reinforces depression. I have outwalked, so the idea that he's walked to the very outskirts of the city. The physical distance between him and others acts as a metaphor for his loneliness, and also everything else is physically distant from him in the poem. Again, this is kind of pitiable and perhaps creates a little bit of pathos for the narrator. There is imagery of light used to convey a lack of hope that his situation will improve. The furthest city light, he's walked away from the light, walked away from hope. So outwalking light suggests that not only that the speaker is depressed, but when he gets far enough into his depression, there is no light or happiness in his life. Superlative reinforces the darkness, contributing to the gloomy, oppressive atmosphere that is created within the poem. This is unusual for Frost because usually he's a pastoral poet that was grounded in nature, which is something that both he and Heaney share. But this is contrastingly an urban setting. He is journeying through city streets as opposed to rural, beautiful landscapes. He attempts to depict the isolation that one can face even in the middle of a city where there's all the hustle and bustle. And I've just said here a little disclaimer that he did usually write about rural life, so this one kind of breaks tradition. Analysis of this, you've got more anaphora. The previous slide had your annotation of what exactly that means. You've got saddest city lane, so the superlative personifies the street, showing his detachment from humanity. He passed by the watchman, which emphasises that there's no interaction or engagement with others and no sense of connection. He dropped his eyes, so he averts his gaze because he doesn't actually want to interact, which is interesting. His chronic loneliness ensures that he also simply is so used to it that he can't even be bothered to engage in anything other than the familiar. So he's used to isolation and it's sometimes comfortable for him, and it creates a resigned, detached tone. Unwilling to explain, so he starts to wish to remain alone, and his isolation is deliberate. He's unwilling to explain why he feels the way he does, possibly again an extended metaphor for his depression, and he is actively choosing to be alone. We can see stood still and stopped the sound of feet. So you've got him not expressing his feelings to anybody. The sibilants used here, the sibilant S sounds, the S, and even the consonant T sound as well, the T, stood still and stopped, and then the feet, and you've got the plosive or fricative F sounds as well. So this echoes the sound of his footsteps, coupled with the use of iambic pentameter, again reinforcing the imagery of his despair and loneliness. You can hear audibly the frustration there. in the f and the t and the s sounds, okay? All of it seems like he is despairing and almost at the end of his tether. Then you can see that his pause suggests a yearning to belong, yet his detachment is emphasised, and this idea of inactivity as well. There's a tonal shift, momentarily hopeful, that this form of communication, the faraway cry in a distant street, is meant for him, but it's short-lived because it's far away, and again that emphasises how removed he really is from all of this, further striving to emphasise how isolated he is. But again, self-alienation. Far away and cry, so it's appropriate for the speaker because it indicates pain, and we know that he's feeling immense loneliness and isolation and pain through his depression. And the enjambment speeds up the pace of the poem here, adding a sense of anticipation for a potential interaction, and then it doesn't happen, so it's anticlimactic. The stillness of the atmosphere is broken by the cry, and there's a feeling of isolation. Then you've got the use of alliteration, recreating the oral imagery of the echoing, isolated cry, and we can see that he longs for something and he's sad that the cry is not for him. Okay, a cry came over. That's your alliterative phrase there. There's a tonal shift again. It's back to resigned or deflated. It's self-pitying. There's imagery of light again, representing hope, but it seems like it is beyond his reach, that it's somehow elusive to him. There is something about the beauty of the light and the nighttime that attracts him, though he does end the poem feeling incredibly unfulfilled. And Luminary is a metaphor for the moon, and again we've got more enjambment here as well. Final two lines, personification. Time seems to have no meaning for him because his isolation is unending. Time neither guides nor judges his journey, it just flows on relentlessly, and you can imagine how that strives to emphasise and exaggerate his depressed state of mind. I have been one acquainted with the night, and the repetition of the opening line and the final line represents how he is stuck in a cycle of depression and he cannot escape. So it paints this really bleak picture for us. And you can see that there's visual and auditory imagery used throughout the entire poem. It's rife with it. And once again, it uses Frost's signature sound of sense. And that's something that you probably really need to research because it's a really good comparative point between him and Heaney.